Just don't want to wake up 10 years from now saying, I should have done it. I should have tried. And that's where it all kind of took off from there at a whole different level.
What is up, everybody? And welcome back to the Schooling Struggle Podcast. It is our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we are all going to struggle, and how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. My name is Pete, coming to you from Heartland, Vermont, and this is an incredibly special episode for me because not only is my co-host and friend Todd here on the microphone, but the one and only Keith Smith, one of my best friends and someone whose life story is incredibly captivating and fascinating to me. And I really wanted for him to come on and conversate with us and have some cool discussions about kind of his journey and decisions that he's made and how that's kind of impacted the trajectory of his life. So I'm super, super psyched to welcome my friend Keith to the podcast. What's up, Keith?
Hey, man, I get to talk before Todd, so that's big time, man. I feel pretty good.
And without further ado is Todd Ellis. What up, Todd?
What's happening, Peter and Keith? Interesting to say.
Yeah, so before we hit record, I was just saying to the guys that Todd and I figured at some point we would bring in some guests on, and it was really important to me that Keith was our very first guest for a number of the reasons that you're going to learn about tonight. So I'm super fired up to get into Keith's story. I know he has a number of followers out there in the Twitter sphere, and I'm curious to know how many of them actually know many of the aspects of the story that he's going to reveal to us tonight. So yeah, let's get into it. So I want to lead off the conversation by saying that I think one of the biggest struggles that we as humans have in general is truly finding that purpose and that fulfillment in our life. Like, what is it that sets our heart on fire? What is it that revs our engine every day? What is it that makes us fired up to get up in the morning and kind of do what we want to do with reckless enthusiasm? And Keith does that every day, which is really, really neat. But before I get into that, I'm just going to set the stage for how Keith and I met. Back when I was in college, I applied for this internship. It was really just kind of like cheap labor, but they call it an internship through the Disney college program. And I got accepted and did not go down the first semester that I was accepted. And in fact, I went down and visited some friends who got accepted to the program. And I noticed that in the apartment that anyone who does this internship was going to be living in, there was 3 bedrooms, and 2 of them shared a bathroom, and one of them had its own bathroom. And I was super excited to get down there and get into the apartment early and claim the room with the bathroom. So I went down there, I registered super early. I got this new internship. I moved to Orlando, just drove 24 straight hours in my dad's Dodge Intrepid that he lent me for a couple months to be able to use in my internship down there. And I get down there and I go bursting into the apartment and somebody has already taken that room. And I come to learn later on that it was Keith. He had better intel and he was more primed to get that room with the bathroom than I was. So I shared a bathroom with 4 other dudes. He only had to share a bathroom with 1. And he walked out of his room and I was like, yo, you got the good room. And that was our first kind of conversation. And over the course of our time living together, we have one story after another we could share. Probably only one of them out of the infinite stories is actually appropriate for my students to hear.
Yeah, this one.
But we got into the habit of calling in sick every Sunday. We figured out how the call-in system worked, that you could actually kind of manipulate it without getting fired. And we'd call in sick every Sunday and we would watch football together. And we would watch the pre-show analysis, and then we'd watch all the football games up through the Sunday night or up past midnight. And I would lay on the ground on a $10 raft, a swimming raft that I bought at Walmart with my comforter, and we would jack the air conditioning as cold as it could possibly go. And we got in trouble for freezing out the air conditioner a couple of times by the maintenance staff because we wanted to pretend it was like a cold Sunday in New England. Keith, also from Massachusetts. What are the chances that my roommate would be from Massachusetts? There's kids from all over the world in this apartment complex. And we watched football every Sunday for the entire time, the 5 months that we lived together. And we decided at the end of the internship, when we moved back to wherever it is that we were going, that we would strive to continue to talk on the phone every Sunday. So now for 21 years, every single Sunday, Keith and I have had a conversation. And the the focus of the conversation has changed quite a bit. It was really sports focused when we were in our 20s, and now we're both parents and navigating the world and trying to make decisions in that regard. But when I lived in Vietnam, when I rode my bike across the country, all these things I did, we always found a way to have a conversation. When I lived in Vietnam, I would wake up early Monday morning when it was Sunday night for him and call. So Keith and I have been talking every single Sunday for 21 years. It's one of the coolest commitments that I've made to myself and to another person in my life, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. So as Keith shares, when I say I've been along for the ride every step I have since 2001, and he's kind of bounced ideas about his approach to life and stuff off me, and it's just been a really, really cool part of the process. So I want to lead off by saying that it's just such a special thing for me to be part of the ride. Keith, thanks.
Oh man, yeah, and I'll just say the first time I ever saw Pete, we were in the check-in line, and here's this kid with super giant shorts on. I think a backwards hat, probably with a headband, armbands, and I remember looking at my friend Jay, who I had come to do this internship program with, and I said, "Check that dude out. Guaranteed, he's going to be our roommate." And every day since, I've been so thankful that I was right, because we had a blast. I won't get anybody in trouble here by telling many of those stories, because they're wholly inappropriate. And as a listener to the show, I know that's where we don't go. But yeah, it was great, and and like you, it's I jokingly say to my wife, I'm like, you're like the second longest relationship in my life, next to Pete, as far as somebody that I speak with very regularly. Which is just kind of funny, because I actually met her about a year after I met Pete. So it's those Sunday conversations, they mean the world to me, and it's great that we've kept them up all through. Let's face it, through your adventures. I'm usually here at home with my feet up, and you're somewhere in the world doing something. And I'm rarely the one who's like, hey, we got to work around my schedule today. But yeah, it does mean the world to me.
So, like I said, I'm so fascinated with people who chase what they love in life and are willing to let things go, let comforts go, all the different things that bring us contentment, but don't bring us that pure passion and love for life and that fulfillment and that feeling of purpose. And that's where Keith has been such an inspiration for me. So Keith, I want to take it back to your high school years and maybe even your middle school years before. As long as I've known you, and I think as long as you've known yourself, you've been a diehard fan of the NBA, the National Basketball Association. And I want to hear a little bit about some of the rituals that you had in high school when it came to your love for basketball. I know that I think you had sheets that held the rosters of coaches and players of every team, and they were handwritten before the internet and computers. So kind of take me back to your love of basketball and some of the things that you did in regard to that.
Yeah, I grew up on a family that loved sports, and for me, basketball was the one that clicked. I think playing basketball was a very easy thing because I could do it by myself, and I had a lot of time by myself as a kid, because my dad traveled for a living. This isn't an exaggeration when I say he was home roughly one weekend a month when I was growing up. And one of those weekends, he put a basketball hoop up in our driveway. My mom worked, so I was a latchkey kid. I would go off to school, and then I would come home and unlock the door, get a snack, and a lot of times grab my ball, and I'd be in the driveway for hours. Because it's one of the only sports you can truly do by yourself, right? Because it's one of the only things where you can practice the actual rhythms and skills needed for the sports. I have no problem admitting to myself now, I wouldn't have been able to then. I was not a very good basketball player. I was a very, very average high school player at best. I also grew to my current height of almost 5'9" by sixth grade. I grew maybe like an inch or two after that.
Wow.
So
I didn't know
topped
that.
out. Yeah, so I was one of the tallest kids. So
Mm.
I also didn't really develop being able to handle the ball and dribble and those kind of things, because it was just throw it to Keith and I'll score inside for a long time. And then as everybody else zoomed past me, that kind of became a problem. Now I went from being one of the tallest to one of the shortest. Yeah, I love the game. You're absolutely right too. I loved everything about it. So I was a kid who pre-internet days, I would cut the rosters out. They would do in the USA Today at the beginning of every season would print, here's all the rosters for all the teams.
So
And
the USA Today was a printed newspaper.
Yes, yeah, for
just
anybody who
letting the
doesn't
young
know what
listeners
it is.
know that.
Exactly, yeah. So I would take that roster paper and I would print that out. And then what I would do is I would then hand write those. And then as trades happen, I would re-hand write the rosters and those kind of things. Again, always following on through the newspaper or through the bottom line on ESPN, which I realize now everybody probably just knows is a thing that always existed. When we were a kid, it didn't, and it would only run every like little bit for the beginning. And then you would sit there and wait. It would be like, wait, did that just say the Celtics traded player X? And then you'd sit there and wait sometimes like 30 minutes for it to come back around after it cycled through. And there was no, just let me grab my phone and check and see what that trade was or anything like that. So, yeah, I loved it. I loved the game. It stuck with me. It was something where all along through high school, everybody starts asking you in high school, what do you want to do? For a career. And I would always say, I want to work in the NBA. And people were like, oh, you want to play? And I was like, no, God, no. I knew then I wasn't good enough for that. But I would say, no, I want to be in a front office. That's what I want to do. I want to be part of a front office. But in 1997, when I graduated high school, I had no concept of how to do that.
So really quickly, can you just tell us real quick what a front office is of a basketball team?
Yeah. So the front office, the easiest way, those are the guys who scout the players, sign the players, trade the players, release the players if need be. They put the team together for the coach to then coach it. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that, but I had no idea how to do that. The internet was still pretty new, so it wasn't as simple as pop online, look up an internship, and hopefully go for it. You kind of needed to know somebody, and I didn't know anybody, so I said, well, you know what, I'll coach at the high school level. So I finished my high school career, went to college, and I started talking to my high school coach and said, can I come around and help with practices? And I became a volunteer assistant and started doing that. Right. Kids I played with the year before were still on the team. And I would, now I was a volunteer coach and those kind of things. And I had a blast doing that, did that all the way through, minus my, little time in Disney there. And I caught back up with them when we got home in January and did that.
So you went to college close enough to your high school where you could help out.
Yep.
Okay.
I went to college in my hometown. I went to Bridgewater State University. Now it's Bridgewater State University. It was Bridgewater State College.
What did you study there?
So that's kind of complicated. Initially, I started out as I didn't know. So I said, you know what, I'll just take all my gen eds. I'll knock all those out in my first couple years, and then I can focus on just major courses after that. By the time I went to Disney on my internship, I was a dual major in communications and history with the assumption of I'll do something in the communications world. Maybe I'll be a basketball commentator or announcer or something like that. And the history was my backup because I'll teach history and I'll coach. That was my plan. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, every history teacher I had was also a coach sports. So that's how it linked for me. I was like,
I would never become a teacher. What a bad idea.
Silly.
It's an insane career decision. So I said, that's what I'll do. So I did the coaching all the way through. Then it was, this Disney thing. I had always loved Disney. I loved the idea of going, and we were in a family that went a lot. I had been 3 times in my life, and it just fascinated me, this whole idea. And then when I saw these recruiters were coming to campus and it's like, I can work at Disney World, like that just blew my mind. And I was like, I'm going to do this.
So basically what that internship was, or what it was pitched to us, was you could go down to Disney for a semester of your college and you could get a full semester's worth of credits. Disney had a kind of a deal worked out with the colleges, and I was a business major, so it kind of fell into the business realm. And Disney in the colleges found a way to make it work, and it was touted as a really good program because you could graduate from college and have Disney on your resume like right out of college. And on top of that, you go down there, and it's way different now. But when we were there, it was a complex with 2,500 kids all between the ages of 18 and 22 from all over the world. And it was like, I don't even know if people know what Maxim magazine is anymore, but like it was touted as like the top, one of the top 10 party spots like in the country. And it was just rage all the time. And it was it's very difficult to put into words the experience of living there, but it was like living on a college campus that had no classes for 5 straight months. It was like spring break for 5 straight months. It was crazy. It was,
And most of us didn't have to work in most of the jobs until like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So you'd be up all night long doing whatever it was you did, and then show up and get yourself to work enough that they didn't send you home and say
parties, and we'd launch water balloons over the it was nuts.
Madness.
Yeah.
Was it like on the in the park you stayed?
It wasn't. So it's very close to the park. Disney actually doesn't. The property Pete and I lived at now is now apartments that anyone can rent.
It was condemned actually, after we left.
Oddly enough, it's being marketed to families, which is kind of, if you've lived at what was then called Vista Way, it would blow your mind that like, wait, families are gonna live in this place where this madness happened. But yeah, it's a few miles away from the park. I know some people probably listen to this have never been to Walt Disney World. It's massive. It's 42 square miles. So the property is huge. It's twice the size of the island of Manhattan. Where we lived was tucked on like one corner of just off the property.
Cool. So what I'm trying to get at is the colleges are saying, hey, this is a great resume builder for your career.
Yes.
You get down there and it's just party central.
Yeah.
So we had a blast.
Loved it.
The listeners of this podcast know that I've never had a sip of alcohol, and Keith is one of my very few friends who's in the same boat. So we struck a chord that way, and we connected that way, and we did a lot of pranks to people who were intoxicated that came in and out of our room.
We wanted nothing more than to hang out in our apartment. Slowly but surely, all of this group of people, because what happens is you have your roommates, hopefully, for most people, and it did for us, became your friends. And then the people who live across the hall from you become your friends. And then the people they work with, and all these people would start to filter in. Our circle grew around the concept of, if you want to hang out with us and have fun, we're not leaving the apartment very often, except to go to work or maybe go play in the park or do something like that. And it became pretty soon, the next thing we knew, all these people who were all about going out in month 1, we're like, nah, we're just going to hang out in the apartment with these guys for the next, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to like 5:30 in the morning, catch a quick nap, shower, and go to work. The
apartment complex was called Vista Way, and we were known as the living room of Vista Way. Everybody came to us.
And Pete mentioned that we turn the air all the way down and then leave the front door to the apartment wide open all the time. So yeah, it was probably not the best use of energy now. Thinking about it.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was
I gotta get us back on track.
Right. Yeah. So I'll just say I wanted to do this Disney thing. I saw it much like Pete. I didn't come the first time I was accepted. My parents were like, I get accepted to work in food and beverage, which is basically like working at a McDonald's. And I'll never forget my dad's exact words were, if you want to skip a semester of school and work at McDonald's, there's one right down the street. You can do that. You do not need to go all the way to Florida. This is insane. You're not doing that. So I learned next time they come around on campus, I'm going to bring my mom at least to this program, because she's going to get blown away by all the Disney of it and be like, we have to let him go. And she'll be the one who convinces my dad. So I remember meeting with the recruiter, and one of the questions they would ask, if you wanted to do something that wasn't food and beverage, custodial, merchandise, if you really wanted to do attractions, which is what I wanted to do, I wanted to run a ride, you had to convince them, because everybody wants to do attractions for the most part. And I remember telling the recruiter, I'm like, this is literally the only way I'll be able to come. I have to do attractions. And then I got hired. And then at that point, my dad was like, well, my arguments were moved. And it was super duper important to my mom that I graduate in the big spring graduation. And I said, well, I'm off a semester. I'm going to end up graduating in the winter. And that was also part of my dad gave in. I was like, fine, go to Florida, go have your fun. I'll never forget. Remember, Pete, at the end, they start telling me, hey, you can extend. You guys want to stay? And I remember calling home and being like, they do this extension thing. My dad being like, that's it. You're cut off. If you extend, you might as well stay for good, because we cannot support you. Got to come back and finish school. Now that I'm older and I have kids myself, I'm there. That was the right decision. Listen to your parents.
Yep. So we lived together. We hung out every moment that we weren't working, and we forged a really deep friendship. And then I went back to New England, did my thing with many of the adventures I was getting into, Keith went back, graduated college, and then went back down to Disney, back down to Orlando for an advanced internship, and really started to mold a career at Disney. For those that don't know, Disney tries to hire from within. So if you really want to work your way up into upper management in Disney or have a good paying, comfortable job there, you're better off kind of starting at the bottom, kind of working your way up and proving yourself. And that's exactly what Keith did for 20 years. You worked
Almost. Yeah. So when I left Disney, I became what was called a campus rep, which was I was the one hanging the posters. Disney's coming on campus. I was the one answering questions for the students. And I did that not only at Bridgewater State, but at several of the surrounding schools where they didn't have a campus rep. So I would go, I'd host information tables, which was just sit down and talk to students for, answer any questions that they had. Also, I stayed current. That also allowed me to keep an ID and keep current with the company. And I never really left Disney until many, many years later. I stayed current with them all the way through. And and like Pete said, that advanced internship, a little bit more serious this time around because those are designed around folks who are, I want to work for Disney. And that's what I did.
What's up, Todd?
Yeah. Was the work that you did for Disney for all those years centered around like the internship experience that you both shared? Or was there just all kinds of different things?
Kind of, sort of. My initial internship when I went back, if you remember in college, there's RAs in college, right? That are the resident assistants. Yeah, I know your story, but you're familiar with the concept though, right? Of RAs.
A student that's in the dorms that's supposed to look after the people that are living in the dorms.
And it was basically like, let's make sure these kids don't do anything too overly crazy. That's what I went back and did in my advanced internship. So even if I was one of the party guys, I wasn't going to be able to be anymore because I was going to have to be a little more reasonable with these kids and helping shepherd them along and making sure. And I have a million stories. We could spend hours telling the stories from there of just that. That was my first experience with my college program. Was very different from the one some of these kids have. Some kids come, they're immediately homesick. They're immediately, some have no life skills at all. They've never done anything away from home with that. So that was very different for me. I should go back and say too, when I came back from Disney, I said, I didn't want to be a communications and history major anymore. I wanted to work for Disney. And I remember talking to my advisor and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. And she was like, totally get it. She's like, yeah, if what you want to do is work for Disney, what's your best way to get there? And I remember talking to the Disney recruiters. I had gotten very friendly with my recruiter. And I remember him saying, just get a degree in something that's meaningful to you. And then we'll take care of getting you back down here. We'll figure out a way. And his assumption was probably, you can come back and work. My job at Disney, I know Pete's talked about it. He was a lifeguard. My job was to ride the train around Magic Kingdom. Hundreds and hundreds of times every day while loading guests on and off that train.
Crazy stories. Crazy stories.
Maniacs.
Some dude on Christmas Eve got so pent up with him because part of his job was to not let people with strollers come up the handicap ramp. Only wheelchairs could access the handicap ramp. And this guy got so mad that Keith wouldn't let him that he took a swing at Keith, trying to knock him out on Christmas Eve.
Crazy. People get nuts. Yeah. It's,
all right. And all right, I got to get us back on track.
Todd, to answer your very simple question with my very long answer. If you guys can't tell, that's how I do things. I love the sound of my own voice more than anything else in the world. I came back and started with those college program kids, but from there, I advanced my career into a lot of different things. I worked in the casting department, which is the group that hires people. And then a lot of what I did was backstage work at Disney. So that's behind the scenes work. That is no one ever really saw me that were guests. Very rarely. I only did a handful of things where I interacted with the guests every day. But one of my goals was to work in the department that I worked in predominantly was, it changed names several times. As I know you work for a very big company, and big companies love nothing more than a reorg, right? Whenever they can.
And acronyms. They love acronyms as well.
Acronyms and reorgs. Yep, absolutely. Yep. So we were labor operations, we were operating labor management, we were workforce management, we were all sorts of things like that. So that's what we were. So basically what my jobs there were, they ranged from scheduling the cast members to work various jobs in the park, deciding how many people we needed to hire, deciding the job I held the longest time was how many people do we need how many popcorn vendors do we need on Main Street at the Magic Kingdom on the busiest days of the year? And then how many on the slower days, how many on the days in between, and those kind of things. That work led me to California. I lived and worked in California, worked at Disneyland for a year and a half, which was amazing. Very quickly, my wife and I decided California was not for us. We were East Coast people. Our whole families were almost all East Coast. It would also, Pete knows this, where we lived, it would take us 2.5 to 3 hours to get one way to work because that's how bad the traffic was, and to get home. There's no way around that. For anybody listening, be like, take side streets or back roads. It doesn't exist. Not how it works in that part of California. So it's just sit in the traffic. And it really, that changed a lot of my perception on where I want to live, the people I want to surround myself with. The people there were great people, just very different from the people I grew up with. We came back, had our daughter, our family grew, and then so this doesn't run all night long. She was about 5 years old when I really started to question, is this what I want to do forever? Do I want to stay with Disney? How much longer do I want to do this Disney thing? And that's where it changed.
So from my perspective, talking to Keith every Sunday through his moves out west and back and all these things, and I knew he'd worked his way into a really good, well-paying, secure job. He had, health insurance. He had, the Disney stock options, all that stuff. And, as a poor Vermont teacher, I was like, wow, he's crushing it. He's so comfortable, all these great things. And we're talking, and a couple of years ago, he says to me, I'm really thinking about trying to follow my dream to work in or for the NBA. And I was like, are you still doing those roster sheets that you used to do in high school? And you said yes. Through that entire time, through your college, through your 20s and your 30s, you stayed up to date on every single transaction of every single player. It was just something you did in your own time. And then I'm sharing this from the outside looking in. And then you started to dabble in, well, I do love this NBA thing, so I'm just going to kind of take my own time. I'm going to continue to work full time, continue to support my family, continue to do all these things. But with my free time, I'm going to chase my love of the NBA. So can you take us through kind of your first steps of deciding to commit to that and kind of walk us through? Like you said, we don't have all night, but I'm really curious to know the details of this. And no detail is too small to be like, I reached out to this person or whatever. But I'm really curious to know, in your 40s or your late 30s, you say to yourself, I'm so comfortable and I work for this mega organization and I'm killing it. And I get great reviews from my bosses every year, and I'm working my way up, and I continue to work my way up, and I can provide for my family. But you know what? I'm going to take a shot. I am going to chase what I've always wanted to chase since I was a little kid, and I'm going to try to make it work. And this is where the story is fascinating to me.
Yeah, so that was Pete's way of saying everything else was boring before then. No, it's,
do we want to talk about the time we took our shirts off and wrestled in the living room?
Sure. I mean, yeah, why not? Right? You're absolutely right. I kept up with all that stuff. It became easier. I didn't continue to do it on paper. I started using a computer and all those things, and I used my Disney job to learn a lot of the skills that helped me in the basketball career. I like to say you always want to be putting new tools in your toolbox. I think that is a thing where, for me, it's about just add skills so you can add value. I believe learning new things is always good, and I want to push myself. So I learned a lot of things. Predominantly working in Excel, in Access, and those kind of programs there, and doing a lot of things through that. And in my Disney work, provided these things that bled over. One thing that my Disney work also got me interested in was contract stuff. In my job, I had to know our contracts in and out, our labor contracts. And Disney has several different labor contracts with all these different union groups that govern how they do business. And I said, you know what? I want to learn the NBA contract stuff a little bit more. I have all these roster sheets, but I don't know how much money guys make and how much they can get paid and all those things.
For those of you that don't know, these NBA contracts are so freaking complicated that the layperson like myself, it's just mind-blowing.
So what I wanted to do is I wanted to learn it. And then, to Pete's point, I wanted to be able to then tell people in a more simple way. And that was initially just going to be my friends who liked the NBA as much as I did. So at this point, social media had taken off. I was on
And how old are
Twitter.
you at this point, would you say?
This was probably 8 to 10 years ago.
Okay.
So sometime between 2012 and 2014.
So you're in your
Um,
30s at this point?
yes. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. In my mid to late 30s. So I cold called the NBA and said, "Can I get a copy of your collective bargaining agreement? Their agreement with the labor union, which is called the NBPA or the NBA Players Association." And I said, "Can I get a copy of that?" And the person was like, "No, like
This is
that's not,
straight out of a
we
movie.
don't do this." So then I said, "Okay." So I hung up the phone. I looked up the number for the NBPA, the union side. And I called them and said, "Can I get a copy of your collective bargaining agreement with the NBA?" And there was not a copy online at this point. And they said, "Yeah, sure. Send us a self-addressed stamped envelope with this amount of postage attached and $3 to cover the printing of the CBA, and we'll mail it to you." And like probably 4 or 5 weeks later, in the mail came a bound copy of the CBA. I've now since made friends with people on that side.
How big is that document? Is that like thick?
Yeah, it's
Like hundreds of
hundreds and
pages?
hundreds of
Okay.
pages. Yeah,
Okay.
long. It's also a legal document, which I have absolutely no training in at all. But I stumbled through it. I learned as much as I could. At this time, as I said, social media and all that stuff is really starting to. It's not like social media was new, but like Twitter and all those things are starting to take off. And there were people who were salary cap experts on Twitter, a handful of them. So what I would do is when I get stuck on something, I would reach out to them and ask questions. And what I would do is I would read the real CBA till I got confused by the legalese. Then I go look up the corresponding section in the FAQ, and that's how I learned.
Someone like me is just like, oh, this player signed for 7 years for $70 million. It's like, all right, they're making $10 million a year. Boom. That's easy for me. But it's not like that. So in real kind of basic layman's terms, how would you explain that?
Sure. So what I would say is the team had enough money under the salary cap to sign the player to that contract, and salaries increase year to year. So in your mind, 7 years, 70 million is $10 million a year. Well, that type of contract would probably start at $8 million and then would go up over the course of the years, and then average 10 million, but it might be 8 1 year, then 9, then 10, then 11, and so on. And that's how we get up to the 70 million. So I would.
Can you just really briefly tell us, or people that don't know, what the salary cap is?
Every NBA team has to operate under that salary cap. I'm not going to bore people to tears. There's mechanisms to exceed the salary cap that are allowed. Everybody has that same 133 million that they can spend. It's a way to level the playing field.
The goal of these teams is to build the best team, best roster under this cap, and there's a ton of logistics that go into that. And you spent years studying to learn every nuance of this salary cap so that people that might be interested, teams that might be interested, front offices that are trying to figure their stuff out, would go to someone like you and say, yo, we want this player. How can we make it work? And you have to say, well, you have to get rid of this player or dump this player or and that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You're pretty spot on. And that,
okay.
So it started initially with just answering questions from other fans. I started to get a little bit of a following that way on Twitter. On one of the message boards, I was writing these insanely long and detailed message board posts that people who really loved this stuff too were reading.
Super niche.
Very, very, very. But people, it's like if you ever think you're the only person who cares about something, I always say, go to Google and start typing it in and it autofills. Somebody else cares about that exact same thing that you're wondering about, right? People got super into it. And the guy who is one of the editors for the main section of this site said, hey, do you want to write for the site? And I said, I haven't, other than these message board posts, I haven't written anything since college. Like, I'm not a writer. And he goes, just write. Passion will come through. I'll work with you. We'll clean it up. We'll fix the grammar, the editing, all that stuff. And that's what we did. So this guy's name is Chris. Still one of the people I lean on for stuff all the time. Even when we're not working closely together on things. Helped me so much. Started writing about these things. That gave me a bigger following. And then if anybody follows the NBA that's listening, there's a reporter named Chris Haynes. He works for Yahoo Sports, but he worked for ESPN at the time. Chris had seen my work, and Chris would occasionally be like, yeah, Keith Smith says Team X has so much cap space this summer, and that's, why they'll be in the mix for player Y. They could try to sign this player because they have to have cap space. And Chris got unfairly bashed. And I was like, Chris is really good at what he does. He's not throwing crap out there. That started Chris and I's friendship. But so anyway, Chris was super nice about saying, hey, if I ever do anything, let's try to work together. Chris brought me over to Yahoo Sports when he moved to Yahoo. Still writing about all the same stuff I was, just on a much bigger scale. Yahoo is one of the big things there. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so from someone who talked to you every Sunday for those years, it seemed to me that every Sunday you're like, yo, I just got contacted by this person and now I'm writing for this. And like, I felt like by the week, your following was growing, your the investment of time and energy you're putting into this side project was growing to the point where, as the health guy, I was legitimately worried about your health. You're staying up all night watching these West Coast games until 2 a.m. You're writing stuff, you're carrying this load, and then you wake up at 6 a.m. and you go work a full-time job all day. And that NBA thing never shuts off. There's always trades, there's always games, there's always news, there's always things going on. And you were basically working 2 full-time jobs for years.
Yes. Yeah. It really became 2 full-time jobs. I started using all of my Disney vacation time around the tent poles of the NBA. So the trade deadline, what the trade deadline is this is the last chance teams can make trades for that season. It's a very big, busy portion of the NBA calendar. So I would take time off around that. I would take time off around the NBA draft. I would take time off every year and go out to Las Vegas for the NBA Summer League. And I would meet all these people. Occasionally, they would see me sitting there on my laptop answering Disney emails because I had the time off, but I still got to, check in and cover things for my team. Because at that point, I was leading a team of about 20 people. So I still wanted to check in on them. And people who worked in the NBA, whether it be for teams or for the league itself or other writers and reporters, like, what are you doing? And I'd be like, oh man, they're like, you're still doing that too? Like, that's crazy. It was nuts.
So again, I'm going to keep interrupting you because the story from my end is so cool, and I want to share my perspective of it as it's going. So Keith starts to really to blow up. The number of followers he had on Twitter went from a small number to a little bit bigger number to a little bit bigger number. And each Sunday he'd tell me, yo, I got this many, now I'm verified, and all these things happening over the years.
The goal was I wanted to top 70,000 followers on Twitter because there was this dog that would show up on these commercials for Twitter when Twitter ran commercials, and the dog had 70,000 followers.
How many do you have right now as we speak?
Almost 110. Running joke with my wife and I was every time I would gain a follower, and I could like at that point I knew every time I gained 1, I would say to my wife, I'd be like, I have 100 followers now. I'm coming for that dog. That was like
you overtook the dog.
Yep.
So you eventually, through our Sunday conversations and just sharing about what's happening in our lives, you say to me, yo, I'm considering stopping working for Disney. And I think if I play my cards right and things fall well for me, that I can actually pursue this MBA thing. And I'm thinking to myself, I know you make a hell of a lot more money than I do because I'm a teacher, and I'm like, I'm like providing for my family with this. I was like, wow, you're to that point, and you're like, well, I'm not quite sure, but I can't do both. I can't do 80 hours a week of everything that I'm doing, and I can't pull these late nights and still be present in my meetings at Disney and all these things. So you say to me one day, yo, I'm going for it. And I remember where I was sitting. I remember what I was looking at when we had this conversation. And I am just so fascinated about anyone that's willing to chase their passion, especially someone who in their 40s is willing to completely switch their career, who's responsible for a kid and a wife and a mortgage, and to take this chance because you love it that much. And you do that. And here's the kicker. You make that commitment, and then what happens?
Yeah, so the goal was and remains to be able to support the family and be, I didn't want them to have to suffer. And what drove me to making the decision was, I'll never forget sitting at a soccer tournament, doing everything I could to find a reliable wireless signal so that I could file a story. And I was like, this is insane. Like, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue to do these 2 jobs at all times because I'm taking everything away from them. We didn't go on a real vacation for years because all my vacation time was used chasing NBA stuff and doing all these NBA things. And I sat down and I worked out the numbers and I said, yeah, we got to make some sacrifices. We'll have to figure some stuff out. But we can do without this. We can do without that. We'll change this. We'll change that. I have the best wife in the world, the best daughter in the world. They were like, go for it. Push. Right. We all think that, but I know I'm correct. I'm getting looks from the guys here. But thankfully, we're all very well supported, I think, at home. So they were all right. If you think we can do it, go for it. And I said, we're not going to have to change anything as far as what they do. Minor stuff, probably stuff, honestly. Now looking back, I'm like, we could have cut that out of lives so many years before. So I said, all right, I'm doing it. I'll never forget going into my boss. At the time, my boss at Disney was probably still to this day the best boss I've ever had at Disney. And I told him, hey, I'm going to leave. And he goes, basketball? And I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. No, I'm going to try. And he was like, all right, I'll make sure you have a good review. We'll make sure you're good. And Pete knows this a lot of times through me. He's probably found this out. People leave Disney and they're all back within a year or two. And he said, I look forward to seeing you back in a couple of years if it goes that way, but I really hope that's not how it goes. I hope you make it. I hope you make it work. So I did this.
And at that point, you had several revenue streams coming in from your NBA stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I was working for 4 different places at that time. And I'd put together enough freelance and part-time work that I was going to make. My wife still works for Disney, has a great career with Disney. Thankfully, she was able to cover the medical benefits, all that stuff for us. So I didn't need those things. So that made it easier. I just had to have money coming in to help pay bills. All the other things she had covered. But no more 401k, no more of that stuff. But I can't tell you how many times I said to Pete, there's no one to wake up 10 years from now saying, I should have done it. I should have tried to do the NBA thing. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it.
I'm getting tingles in my spine right now just hearing you talk about this. It's amazing to me.
20 conversations of we broke the Sunday conversation rule because I had multiple times during the week. I was like, I just need to talk through this. Like, let's figure this out. Todd probably knows this. I don't know, everybody listening. Pete goes to bed like the same time my parents go to bed at night. So sometimes it'd be like I would wake up to text from him at 4 or 5 in the morning that I'd send him a text at 2:30, and it'd be like, all right, cool, like that's the response time, right? So I remember saying, all right, I'm doing it. I'm going to do it. I told my boss now we're going to go. And I went and said, let's go. And gave my notice. I stayed on with Disney a little longer than 2 weeks because I wanted to make sure things were buttoned up and my replacement was going to be ready to go. Stopped working there in just towards the end of February of 2020. Literally 3 weeks later, everything shut down. The NBA season, I'll never forget watching on TV this player named Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz was the first NBA player to come out as having tested positive for COVID. They were getting ready to tip off a game. This guy comes sprinting out of the back. They shut it down. They canceled the rest of the games that night. And by the next morning, they had said, we're going to stop. Now, like everything else it was, we're going to stop for 2 weeks. So I was like, all right, for 2 weeks, we'll be fine. We'll get through it. We're going to treat this like the All-Star break, like a little vacation. A little weird, right? I'm only 3 weeks into fully doing this, but it's fine. We'll figure this out. Months go by. I was absolutely crushed. And like I left a 20-year career with Disney. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I
remember having these conversations with you and just being like, come on, like you can stick with it. Like you can just, and you're like, yo, should I go drive for Uber? Should I apply with Amazon? Should I apply with Walmart? You're like, what am I going to do? And as your friend, I just felt helpless to be like, but all I kept saying was, yo, like you did it. Like it's easy for me to say, but I'm not feeding your family, but you got to chase this thing. Just chase it.
Meanwhile, though, Disney's closed down too, right? Like the whole world's evolving.
Disney did close down, but Disney kept the vast majority of their people on through the beginning part of the pandemic with full pay. Because remember, right, it was always 2 weeks. All right, it's going to be
Yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
more weeks. It's going to be. Then
We
it
get through
was
this.
like, oh, this is like months we're looking at. We were extremely fortunate that my wife stayed working the entire time, doing her job, even through the closure and everything, because they still had some people stay on to do certain work.
And
So
they were
that
making
was
big cuts in her department too. I remember
correct.
that
Yes.
conversations we had.
Yeah, her department went from like hundreds of people down to like 8 people actively working. And thank God every day she was one of the 8 people, like, because we wouldn't have been able to make it. And I am still thankful. So two of the places I was writing for at the time kept me on longer than they should have. And I'll never forget getting those phone calls of, hey, we can't anymore. There's no games. There's nothing to cover. We covered horse, right? If anybody's an NBA fan, they probably know they aired players shooting themselves on cell phones on their own private courts at their homes. They played horse, and that was on ESPN for like 4 nights. And I was like, we don't know when it's coming back. Yahoo had kept me on as a freelancer, so we were doing stuff on occasion at Yahoo. And what really, so this is when Pete said we would have these conversations. I'd be like, I'm gonna have to do something, and it was like driving Uber wasn't really a thing because nobody was using them. But I was like, maybe I could do that if things pick up. But I was like, what, Amazon is now, right? Amazon was like the one place that was like, hey, we'll hire anybody because everybody was getting stuff delivered off Amazon, all these grocery deliveries. I'm like, maybe I could do that. But I said, you know what, I'm gonna write one more thing that I want to write. At this time, the NBA is going through their whole, how could we restart? How could we come back? Every
Now, every
sport's
other league completely shut down and said we're not coming back. The season is over mid-season. College football, all these things shut down, and the
the
NBA starts to
NBA.
have these conversations about, well, maybe not.
Yep. And one of the things that happened was people were like, well, what if they play in Las Vegas where they do the summer league? What if they play on a private island somewhere? What if they played on cruise ships? And I was like, I've been on cruises. Like, yeah. Oh, hey, shots up for the win. Oh, a wave came through and now it falls off. Like, that was never going to be a private island, was not going to be a thing. I knew Las Vegas, where they play summer league, it's in the middle of an actual city. And I had said to my boss, if they want to do this, Disney's the place. Disney has a Wide World of Sports complex, which has multiple gyms. They have all these empty hotels. It's private property. They can cut it all off. My editor, this guy at Yahoo named Joe, knows Disney very well. He said, write it. Let's see where it goes. All right, cool. I'll never forget sitting down that night and I wrote it. I started calling people at Disney. Hey, I need to check this. Like, would this work? Like, does this,
What is
am I
it?
right?
You're writing a story about the potential that this could
Yep.
occur. Okay.
If the NBA wants
Bubble.
to restart, they got to do it at
Okay.
Disney. Do it
And
at
basically,
Disney.
it was
That's
where's a spot that the NBA can finish their season in a bubble where all the players, coaches, and teams are in one spot and there's no interaction with the outside world.
outside world.
How
And
can we shut them in? Basically, bring a camera crew in and film the rest of their season.
So I said, check sources on the NBA side. Would this be feasible? And they were like, it's probably not realistic, but sure. Like, yeah, I mean, in reality, like the facilities that they have are enough for what we need. The hotels are enough for what we need and all these things. So I wrote up the proposal. We posted it for Yahoo. I'll never forget. We posted it on April 16th of 2020 is when it posted. By that afternoon, it was easily the most read thing I've ever written. I was getting hit on Twitter every 10 seconds with combination of this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're an idiot. There's a pandemic going on. You're trying to put your needs for sports over the better for people. To this is the greatest idea I've ever seen. I need sports back in my life. I'm going crazy. Stuck here at home. NBA do this. People tagging teams, players. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, like putting all this stuff out there. By later that afternoon, we'd gotten an email from the NBA itself that said, literally all it said was, thank you for a thoughtful and thorough idea. Fast forward a month, about 2 to 3 weeks later, one of the big reporters tweets, the NBA is actively in discussions on how to finish the 2020 NBA season. They only had about 20 games to go and then the playoff. And said one of the sites under consideration, Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And it just gave it a whole new life. And that was when everything flipped for me, where it was, I'm done with doubting. I can do this. This is going to be what I do. Now, I'm not going to have a Disney story in me related to the NBA every time, but I can do other stuff. People then started coming back, wow, this guy actually knows the salary cap. He knows all these other things too. And that's where people picked things up. And that's where it all kind of took off from there at a whole different level for me. I had a good following. I was carving out a good career, and this just exploded.
So this, my friends, is where Keith's story gets even better. And I'm really psyched to hear all that he has to share after this kind of explosive moment in his career. But due to time, we're going to make this a double episode. So I'm going to leave you in suspense for a week until we release the second episode of Keith's story. And you can hear how it brings him to where he is now and much of the mindset and lessons that he's learned along the way to get himself to where he is at this point. So I'm sorry to do this to you, but I really didn't want to cut the conversation short. I wanted to get all of the nitty gritty into it, and we're going to make it a double episode. So with that said, we so very much appreciate your ears. We thank you for your time. We are grateful for your attention. School and Struggle Podcast featuring Keith Smith, episode 1, episode 2 coming at you soon. We are out. See ya.